Good evening. Thank you all so very much for being here. It's a really special occasion to be able to welcome back Toru Ito to the GSD. As you know, Ito-san is a friend of the school. He's been involved with the school for a number of years, and I think many of us feel lucky to have him as a friend and so committed to all his various activities, involvements with the school. The lecture that Ito-san is going to give tonight is really being presented, as you've seen from the poster outside, under the rubric of the Kenzo Tange Lecture. And I'm sure everyone in this room knows who Kenzo Tange was, and I'm not going to ask for any raise your hands or anything like that, but I don't want to get into trouble. But you should know that the school has had a very, very long history of connections with Japan, and so much of actually what is happening today in terms of, for example, our celebration of the work of Fumihiko Maki and others, Taniguchi-san, this grows out of the relationship with the school when they were actually students here. And so we feel very connected to contemporary Japanese architecture, but really to the lineage, to the history of this architecture as well. We've had a very long history of something like 25 plus years of connection with the Kenzo Tange Professorship, which is something that happens here every year. And in the fall, Toru Ito taught the studio based in Tokyo, the studio abroad, where he was the Kenzo Tange professor, and he now gives the lecture this semester. But we're very happy that he's here. He's also here with one of his colleagues, Julia Lee, who's also an architect, and we're very happy that she's here. And both Julia and Ito-san have been collaborating with a series of studios that have been happening in Japan. It started in 2011 when they dealt with the Tohoku region. Then this past fall, they focused on an island called Omishima. And next fall, we will have another studio that will be working on the island of Omishima. And in fact, this morning, Ito-san made the presentation for the studio for next fall that will be located in Tokyo, but actually the project will be based in Omishima. I think everyone knows that Ito-san has had a very long history of connections to really doing amazing architecture, an architecture that is also very much linked with issues of nature. Landscape has played an important part in his work. But more recently, I think he has also become increasingly involved in the relationship between the architectural, if you like, landscape issues and social issues. And this has been obviously demonstrated by the work that he's done in the area, the tsunami hit area in Japan, in the way in which he has also organized a kind of collaborative of contemporary Japanese architects to really think through some of these big issues that face Japan as a collective rather than as individual practices. And it's exemplified by a move towards the smaller scale and really using, if you like, a kind of acupuncture urbanism to develop a series of small-scale projects that are also more easy to construct, more manageable, but they can also have much more direct impact in terms of how quickly they can be built, the kind of audiences that they can address. And so I think that that has been a very noticeable shift, and I think this has been something that is very much reflected in the teaching that he has been doing with us. Obviously, it's also important to mention that this kind of this continuity of this kind of work also goes hand in hand with focus on much larger scale projects like the very well-known Sendai Mediatek and its focus on the interrelationship between the architectural, the structural, and really a different kind of conception of the public, and many other projects such as the Taichung Opera House, which he will show us also tonight, which is about to open officially later in the year. Ito-san has also, of course, been recognized in 2013 with the Pritzker Prize, with the Golden Lion Award at the Venice Biennale, and he is someone that I think is truly deserving of all the recognition that is out there for architects, because he's really unbelievably committed to the creation of ideas, developing incredible places, and making an important contribution to society through architecture. So please join me in welcoming Toyo Ito and Julia Lee.
Thank you very much, Mosen-san. And I'm very happy to give a lecture here. This evening, I want to speak about how I create places. I always don't like to divide spaces. For me, the space is just void, expanding unlimited. When I design spaces, I put some elements. Sometimes it's columns, or sometimes it's natural light, or many elements in the void spaces. Between these elements, there comes different places, like swirls in the stream, or ripples in the water. I explain some example, but my English is very slow, so I'm sorry. I ask Julia Lee from my office in Tokyo, translating Japanese to English. Okay. The first drawing is very old. It's 僕の一番ファンダメンタルな建築に対するディシプリンを示しています。
So this sketch of his is actually shows a really fundamental principle behind his architecture.
桜が咲くと今でも人々は桜の下に集まって、こういうパーティーを開くわけですけれども、少し前まではこのように幕を巡らしていました。
So it is still very common till this day, where during the sakura season, people will congregate under the sakura blossom trees. But actually, back in the older days, they used to use this kind of fabric screen to actually create a place.
ここで重要なことは、人々はまず場所を選ぶということです。
The most important thing is the people actually choose where they want to be.
きれいな桜の木の下というのはもちろん重要なことですけれども、その土地が眺めがいいかとか、日が差してくるかとか、あるいはウェットな敷地なのかドライな敷地なのかといったさまざまな風の方向とか、そういったことを考えながら非常に動物的に場所を決めていきます。
So the main point is how people would choose the place they want to be. For example, obviously in this situation, they would find maybe the best tree they want to be under, or more importantly, how the views are at that place, whether the ground is dry or wet, whether the wind blows through the space enough or not. So they choose their place almost like with their animal instincts.
Next. Movie. これは水の中に波紋が広がっていくというイメージです。
So this is an image showing how ripples would dissipate in water.
私はこのような空間の中に波紋が広がっていくようなイメージを日本語の空間のように感じています。
So actually, the way the waves dissipate, as you saw in the video just now, is very similar to how Japanese language is structured. He feels that the way that the language is positioned in space is very similar to how a ripple is dissipating in void.
日本語の空間では何もない空間、日本語の構造は何もない空間の中に言葉が漂っています。
So very different from the English language. Japanese language is basically structured in a way that there are these key elements that are floating in the space.
そしてその間に確かな構造はなく、それを読み取る人がそれを結び合わせて一つの意味を作り出していきます。
There's no strict structure to how you conduct a sentence. So in Japanese language, it's up to the people's interpretation and also into the person who speaks. They can choose their own words and how they structure it accordingly.
建築を考えるときにも同じようなことを私は考えています。
So similarly for architecture, he has the same principle behind it.
例えば仙台メディアテイクではこのような13本のチューブということがそのエレメントになります。
For example, in the Sendai MediaTek, as you all know, we have 13 tubes in one plan in the building. So these are the elements in the architecture.
この場合にはこのチューブは構造体なので、この構造的な秩序によってある程度決められました。
So in this case, because the tubes are also a structural element, that is what dictates, their positioning and so on.
次は台中で作られているナショナルオペラシアターですね。
So this is the National Taichung Theater, which we are actually building in Taichung.
この場合もチューブが立体的に連続していくようなシステムで作られていますけれども、考えていることはほぼ同じです。
So in this case, the tubes basically interconnect vertically and horizontally in a three-dimensional manner. So, but basically the thoughts behind it is very similar to what Sendai MediaTek is doing.
Next. で3番目に岐阜メディアコスモス、これは去年オープンした仙台とプログラムが極めて近い建築ですけれども、ここではグローブと呼んでいるこのサークル、後でご説明しますけれども、これらによって場所が作られています。
So in this case, the third building is the Gifu Media Cosmos. It's a library complex that was complete last year. We will go into more detail later, but basically it's also the same principle where we have these globes that we call places and elements in the space.
ここでは現実的な条件によってこの外のフレームが決められていますけれども、実際にはこれらはどこまでも広がっていくようなイメージです。
In his architectural image, there is never a confinement to the architecture. It actually should always dissipate infinitely.
したがって私にとってはこの外部と内部を切るこの壁はファサードというよりもセクションを示しています。
So in actual case, you can see, obviously there's an envelope to the building, but to him, it's not really considered as a facade. It's actually a sectional cut, so that it's actually meant to continue infinitely in space.
Next. まあ家具をデザインするときにも、まあ、そんなイメージを表現したいと考えています。
It's the same image when he designs furniture.
Next. まあこのような、プロダクツの場合にも、ここで波紋が広がっていく。変えるよりも、まあ、この波紋が僕にとっては重要なことです。
Even for product design, it also embodies the same language.
Next. まあこれは私はその日本の建築というよりも日本の庭園をデザインするときによくイメージをしています。
So when he makes architecture, he often refers more to the making of Japanese gardens rather than making of Japanese architecture.
これはおよそ400年ぐらい前でしょうか、京都に作られた桂離宮という、まあ、皆さんご存知だと思いますけれども、日本の建築および庭園で最も美しいものですね。
So as you all know, this is a really well-known Japanese garden, Katsura Rikyu, which was built 400 years ago in Kyoto.
まあ、ここのゲートから入ってきて、ここに母屋があるわけですけれども、ここからさまざまな池の周りにさまざまなエレメントが、散在しています。
So from the top, where he pointed just now at the top, is where you would enter the entire premise. But then you walk slowly into the main building, and around the pond, which is in the middle, we have these elements that are scattering around the pond.
お茶室、休憩所、あるいはきれいなツリーといったようなエレメントです。
For example, tea houses, resting places, or even like a symbolic tree. These elements basically create places around this pond.
それらを結んでいく、はっきりとしたストラクチャーはありません。
So there is no defined way of connecting these places.
Next. 非常に複雑なエレメントから成り立っていて、人々はまあそれらを自分で自分の選択によって選び取って一つの庭園という経験を作り出します。
So with these different types of complex elements, every person individually would choose the way they experience the garden. So every person has a different experience of the Japanese garden.
Next. ここにあるようなこの飛び石ですね。これらも重要なエレメントの一つです。
Even in the micro, way of design in these Japanese gardens, you can see these stepping stones are also, rather than all forcefully connected, they're all scattered.
Next. 絶え間なく視線が変わります。
So your views and directional views would change as you move across these different elements.
それからたくさんの道筋があって、それらを人々は自由に選び取ることができます。
So you can see that there is a combination of different elements here, even for stepping stones, where people can actually choose their own path.
Next. まあ大変美しいストーンですね。
You can see it's a very beautiful way of using stone.
OK。で、私はまあ最も初期の1976年デザインしたホワイトユーという小さな住宅の時からまあそのようなイメージを持っておりました。
So we now go on to a project that was back in 1976 is one of his earliest works, and back at the time he already has this notion with him.
まあこの時は 私36歳だったんですけれども、非常に硬い殻で、閉ざしてしまいました。
So this was built when he was 36 years old, and you can see that the design was, he was determined to create this really kind of rigid design.
Next. コートヤードですね。
So this is courtyard.
Next. この一周ワンラウンドすると約50メーターの長さがありますが、それらは光によってリズムが作られています。
So this whole length of this internal space is almost 50 meters long, but by using light as an instrument, he creates these different places also in the architecture.
上からの光、横からの光。
So, for example, light coming from the top, where he's pointing now, or light coming from horizontally.
And again, the light from the top and the light from the top. そう、明るいところと暗いところが交互に現れます。
So then you get these zones of light and darkness that are dissipated across this space.
Next. で、全体として全体の形は非常に単純、どこも同じなんですけれども、それらをさらに小さなエレメント、小さなカーブであるとか、こういったエレメントによって、これらがこの空間が連続して組み上がっていくと。
Although it's a very simple U-shaped, we have these little elements where he would change the curvature of the curve at places, and sometimes where he would introduce a corner. So these small elements and details actually create these places also.
Next. この横からの光の明るいダイニングテーブルのこちらに小さなカーブによって暗いスペースを作っているわけです。
So the light coming from on the horizontal direction would create a very bright space at the dining area, but with a slight change in curvature, you can see that there is a zone that is slightly dark behind the curved wall.
Next. 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 Okay. 次に仙台メディアテックに行きましょう。
So we go on to Sendai MediaTek.
Next. コンペティションのモデル1995年ですね。
So this is a model created during competition submission for this Sendai MediaTek in 1995.
このチューブとフラットなスラブ。これだけで基本的には構成されています。
So it's a very simple composition of tubes and plates that intersect each other.
Next. これは初期のスタディ中に私のノートに書かれたスケッチですけれども、このように最初にお話したようなイメージがここに描かれています。
So this is one of the earliest sketches in his notebook, and if you can look at the top sketch, it's actually again you can see the ripple concept.
このようなチューブの間にさまざまな場所が生じ、そしてその間に流れが生じるわけですね。
So in between these tubes, basically you would see that there are these ripples that forms and places that would happen between these tubes.
それが実際にどのように実現されたかをビデオで見ていただきたいと思います。
So now we look at how these places basically happen between the tubes in actual life after its completion.
7層のフロアはほとんどすべて同じプランなんですけれども、 その間に家具の配置によってさまざまな違った場所が作られるわけです。
So basically, there are 7 different floors, and with the tubes in a similar location, you would imagine a similar plan, but by using different furniture combinations and compositions, actually different places can be experienced.
ここはグランドレベルの言っちゃった。Okay. This furniture was designed by Kazuyo Sejima-san. 場所を選ぶことができる、利用者が場所を選ぶことができるというのは常に私にとって非常に重要なことです。
So the ability for the users to choose where they want to be in terms of a place is very important for him in his making, in all his architecture.
このチューブによって上下の関係も作られていきます。
So through tubes, you create relationships even between floors as well.
Next one. 次は2006年からすでに10年経ちますが、台中で作られ続けているオペラシアターです。
So next we go on to the National Taichung Theatre, which started exactly 10 years ago.
Next. ようやく建築はほぼ出来上がりました。
So finally, the building is almost complete.
このコンペティションの、審査委員長はモーセンさんでした。
So Mosen was in the jury for this competition.
Thank you very much. いや、なぜならば、日本ではこんなプロジェクトは絶対にコンペティションで通りませんから。
He's really grateful for you because a project like this will never happen in Japan.
そのコンペティションの頃には全く何も周辺にはなかったんですけれども、今このように、高級なアパートで囲まれてしまいました。
So at the time of the competition, there were hardly any of these high rises, but after over years and years, there are a lot of real estates and a lot of buildings happening around the area.
新しい開発エリアで、その公園の中にあります。
So this is within a development, large development. So the building is within a landscape design.
Next. もう一度グランドレベルのプランを見ていただくと、公園がこのエントランスホールまで入り込んでいるような、そんな連続的な空間を作りたいと考えました。
So if we look at the ground floor plan again, you can see that how the landscape is interconnected to the internal spaces and how the tubes are also interconnected in the space.
Next. これが構造体ですね。先ほどの仙台の時にはチューブの配置というのは構造的な条件はありましたけれども、かなり感覚的に柱の配置を決めていったんですけれども、この場合にはグリッドからスタートして、それを変形させながらこのような構造体にたどり着きました。
So this is the structure of the building, as you can see. Well, as we mentioned earlier for the Sendai MediaTek, the tubes were basically positioned with respect to the structural calculations, and they were positioned in a certain way that the span, is limited to how the span works. But here, it's a very different, it's a complete different story. Sorry. So he was saying that actually the way this was built was from a grid, and it was deformed slowly, and then it becomes a three-dimensional grid.
Next. この中に3つのオペラシアターが入っておりまして、この赤いのがグランドシアターと呼ばれる2000席、そして800席のプレイハウス and underground small theater.
So you can see that here we have three main theaters within this opera house. The first one is the Grand Theater, the red one, with 2,000 seats. The second one we call the Playhouse in blue. It has 800 seats. And the third one, the smallest one, we call it the Black Box, and it's basically situated underground, so it connected to the landscape as well.
Next. このアルゴリズムのムービーをご覧ください。
So this is a video of the algorithm.
Well, 各フロアごとに少しずつ違ったパターンをつなぎ合わせています。
So actually, a different pattern happens on every floor if you cut through this structure.
で、スムーズイングを書いてある。
And it's smoothed afterwards here, as you can see.
基本的には2組のチューブ、連続する水平にも垂直にも連続するチューブの2組のチューブからチューブの連続体から出来上がっています。
So it's basically formed from two groups of tubes that are interconnected both vertically and horizontally.
Okay. 同じ今度はセクションのムービーですね。
So now we move on to the sectional movie.
これは垂直方向に10センチごとにカットしたものを連続させたものです。
So this is actually a video made by cutting through the building at 10 centimeters apart.
これは平面方向で切っても同じようなパターンが現れる。
If you do the same in plan, you get the same video, probably, same effect.
今出来上がりつつあるグラウンドレベルですね。
So this is an almost complete ground level.
Next. 5階。
This is the fifth floor.
オフィス、それからギャラリースペース、レストラン等がこの階に置かれる予定です。
Where the offices, restaurant, and gallery will happen.
Next. これは屋上がもうすぐ完成しようとしているところですね。
This is a photo of the construction site where the roof was about to be cast.
Okay. これは非常に面白い映像なんですけれども、 洞窟の中の古代の人が現代都市を見ているような風景です。
This is a very interesting, poetic photo, actually, showing a cave-like situation, but looking into the modern city from a cave.
Next. まだ工事中のホワイエのスペースですね、大ホールへの。
This is a photo of the construction site at the Grand Foyer.
Next. で、これをどのように作ったかという工法を示す映像ですけれども、トラスウォール工法と呼ばれる工法でできています。
So this slide basically shows how we construct this structure, and we call this the truss wall construction.
この、黄色い部分を取り出しますと、垂直方向にまず2次元のカーブのトラスを作ります。
So you can see the yellow highlighted area when exploded on the right. Basically, it's composed of linear truss units.
でそれを20センチごとに、このようなバーティカルなトラスを作っていきます。
So at 2 centimeters, 20 centimeters pitch, these linear truss elements will come together.
少しずつその2次元のカーブが違いますので、それを横に結ぶと3次元の曲面が出来上がります。
Actually, the curvature basically varies very slightly. So by combining these linear elements, you could create a three-dimensional curved, three-dimensionally curved unit.
このトラスの両サイドにメッシュを張ってコンクリートを現場で流していきます。
So on both sides of this truss unit, we would attach mesh on both sides, and then the concrete would basically be poured into this truss unit.
Next. コンストラクションサイトのムービーですね。
So this is a movie of at the construction site showing how it's done.
サイトの足元にこのような工場が作られました。
So at the ground level near the site, this is where the truss units are being made. 鉄板の上にこのようなラインを描いて、そこにトラスをまず。So the workers would mark out by hand these units, the outline of the units, and then they would attach, as you can see in the video, they would attach the bars, the steel bars, accordingly. 全ての部分は全く同じシステムなんですけれども、気が遠くなるような作業でもあります。So you can see that it's actually the same rule applies everywhere in this building, but actually it's a really tedious task for the workers. これ今横につないでいるところですね。So now they're connecting it horizontally. でそれを運搬できるピースにまた分解して、それを現場で吊り上げます。So these walls are basically split up into units that are transportable to the site, and then you can see that they are hoisted in a manageable size. でメッシュを。So they're attaching the mesh now. 2種類のメッシュですね。So there are two types of meshes, and they're basically combining it pouring the concrete.
で、完全に固まる直前にこの網を剥がしていきますね。
So when the concrete is set, the mesh is removed, as you can see.
まあ、3年ぐらい、ほぼ2年半ぐらい同じような作業が繰り返されていました。
So about 2 years or 3 years of the same tedious construction, it just went on site.
そして一昨年の11月に1ヶ月だけグランドシアターが仮オープンされました。
So last year in the fall, the building was opened temporarily for 1 month, and only the Grand Theatre.
仕上げされた状態ですね。
So you can see this is the finished condition.
Next. 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 で、これは800席の劇場へ入るためのプレイハウスへ入るためのフォアイエ。
So this is the foyer for the playhouse. That was the medium-sized one that houses 800 people.
最近台湾のアーティストによってこの壁画が出来上がりました。
This painting on the wall was done by a local Taiwanese artist.
Next. Next. で、このプレイハウスの部分が一番工事が遅れているんですけれども、大体目処がほぼ出来上がりつつあります。
So this playhouse is actually experiencing the most delays, but now we finally can see it finishing up.
Next. これが完成図ですけれども、グランドシアターは今年の9月30日、オペラによってオープンし、こちらの中劇場は10月1日と2日このステージでピアノのパフォーマンスが行われますが、そのステージデザインを今私が引き受けております。
So the Grand Theatre will officially open on the 30th of September this year, whereas for this playhouse, it will open on. There will be an event or performance as such on the 1st and 2nd of October by a pianist, and her name is Mukayama Tomoko from Holland. And we're designing the stage design for it as well.
かなり大掛かりなテキスタイルを使ったデザインをする予定です。
The stage design is basically uses a fabric and is quite complex as well.
Next. 地下のブラックボックスはステージの奥が開くと野外劇場につながってきます。
So this is a black box that was the third performance space, and it's from the underground, but it's connected to the landscape, as you can see, into an amphitheater.
Next. で、ルーフガーデン。もう少し時間経つとこのチューブの上まで緑が伸びていく予定です。
This is the roof garden as of now, but he anticipates the plant to crawl up further.
周りの公園はもうオープンしてますので、毎日こういった人々で賑わっています。
So the landscape and the park around it is already open and usable, so you can see that every day people would use this public space.
Next. 夕方もこの壁面にプロジェクションをしたりしながらコンサートやダンスのパフォーマンスなどが行われています。
So during nighttime, we would have these projections on the wall of the building, as well as these light ups where they would have maybe performance outside.
鑑賞用のプールも、このように子どもによって占拠されてしまいました。
You can see the pools are being used really well by the children.
Next. 3つ目のプロジェクトは岐阜メディアコスモスというプロジェクトで昨年の7月にオープンしました。
So we move on to the next project, the Mina no Mori Gifu Media Cosmos, which was complete last year in summer.
Next. このプロジェクトのプログラムは仙台メディアテイクに極めて近いんですけれども、わずか2層低層で作られています。
So this building has a similar program to Sendai MediaTek. However, it only has 2 stories.
ワンフロアは90メーターの80メーターという大きな平面を持っています。
So one plan is 90 meters by 80 meters. It's a very large plan.
そして西側にこのような新しいプロムナードもデザインされました。
And flanking the west side, we have these series of trees.
そして南側には近い将来シティホールが来る予定です。
In this, along the south side, there will be a city hall. It's not built yet, but they are planning to build a city hall.
Next. これは2階のプランで先ほどご覧いただいたようにここで後ほどご説明しますが11個のグローブによってこの場所が作られています。
So you already saw this plan just now earlier. On this plan, basically, this is the library, and we have 11 globes that are basically suspended above the space.
Next. これコンペティションの時に描いたものですけれども、このグローブから周りに力がスパイラル状に広がっていくようなそんなイメージを描きました。
So this is a sketch, an early sketch during the competition phase, and you can see that these globes actually creating a spiral movement like a whirlpool around it, and it just infinitely expands outwards.
Next. 南側のファサードですね。
This is the south facade.
Next. 西側のプロムナードで、これはすでに1年以上前からオープンしております。
So this is the west promenade of trees, and this promenade is basically opened a year before the building opened.
Next. さまざまなここでもコンサートパフォーマンス等が行われています。
So around the building, again, there are all these public events and activities that happen in these areas.
Next. Next. ここで最も重要なコンセプトはいかに自然エネルギーを利用するかということでした。
So this is a very important conceptual diagram that shows how we want to allow energy efficiency in this building.
地下水が非常に豊富なので、それを組み上げて多少の温度調整をして、1階と2階の床に温水または冷水を流します。
So around this area, groundwater is very abundant, and so basically we want to use this as much as possible, and maybe control the temperature only slightly, and using this heated or slightly cooled water and feed it into the floor slabs for both the ground floor and the second floor.
床の輻射暖房、輻射冷房をやるわけですね。
So that means that we have a radiant heating or cooling floor system.
そしてさらに、壁が極めて少ないので、自然の力で、そこから上がってきた暖かい空気あるいは冷たい空気をゆっくりと循環させて、夏は最上階トップから排出し、冬はトップを閉じて、この中で循環させます。
So you can see that actually the radiant floor from the radiant floor panels, the air is there's an air movement that is generated from this, and basically with the globe, as you can see in the section, during summertime, the heated air, the really hot air that is collected at the top of the roof will be dissipated on the top. You can see in the diagram, and during winter, that top opening will be closed so that the hot air is collected under the globe.
And natural light
And
is
natural light as well,
coming
coming down.
around the globe. それから残ったところで太陽光パネルを貼りますね。
So we also put solar panels in some parts of the roof.
このような工夫をすることによって、従来の同じ規模の建物に比べ、消費エネルギーを2分の1にするというコンセプトで、コンペティションに臨み、それはほぼ達成できました。
So this is, we actually had a target to allow for this building to perform with an energy cut of 50% in comparison to a normal building of this size. So this is actually our proposal during the competition stage, but in actual fact, we have almost reached that target.
Next. そしてもう一つはこの地域で採れるヒノキという木を使ったこの屋根を木造で作るということです。
So another important thing, point for this roof is that it's made out of timber slats, which are in a very domestically available size, locally harvested timber, so that it's very readily available.
まずプライウッドで、型を作り、その上にこの2センチ ×12 センチという板を、極めて簡単に曲がるので、その型に合わせて、3方向に貼って重ねていきます。
So as the first step, we use plywood to make a mold, and on top we have layers and layers of these timber slats in 3 different directions. So they basically they're stacked on top of each other, and the size is about 2 centimeters by 12 centimeters.
Next. これはあれで撮ったムービーをご覧いただきます。
This is a video taken using a drone.
このレイヤーが一番柱に近いところでは21層42センチあります。
So where the roof connects to the steel column, we have almost as much as 21 layers of these timber slats.
トップの高いところではその半分ぐらいですね。
So for the top areas where the air is dissipated just now in the section diagram, it's almost half of that amount of layers.
これはアラップのカナダさんと一緒にコラボレーションをいたしました。
We collaborated with Canada-san from Arup for this project.
ここは柱の、場所です。
So you saw that the more dense areas are where the columns are connecting the roof underneath.
この上にプライウッドを貼り、そして断熱材を入れて防水で仕上げます。
And above this, after this construction, above this, we had to put plywood and insulation, as well as a surfaces layer on top, with a waterproofing layer as well.
Next. この150人ぐらいの大工さんがこの施工をやってくれま
So you
した。
can see that at one time there were almost 150 workers on the roof, working on the roof.
Next. グランドフロアのプランですけれども、真ん中にガラス張りの閉花の書庫があります。
So this is the ground floor plan, and you can see in the middle, which is encased in glass, is the closed stack for the books that are closed, but they're visible.
そして、東西南北に自由に人々は通り抜けていけます。
So in all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, people can come into the building as freely as they want.
で、東側には200席ぐらいの小さな多目的ホール。
So where he's pointing now is a multi-purpose hall which houses 200 people.
そして、ギャラリースペース。
Below it is a gallery space.
オープンな外にまで連続するギャラリースペース。
And an open gallery space that also opens out to the outside.
これはレストラン。
And that's a restaurant on the left.
それから西側にワークショップのスペースですね。
So on the west side is where the workshop areas are.
オープンなカウンターがあって、利用者が、いろんな相談にスタッフに対してさまざまな相談をすることができます。
There are also these counters where the local citizens can consult about their daily matters.
いくつかのスタジオがここに用意されています。
And there are also these studios where people can rent and use.
Next. これはオープンなギャラリースペースで子どものワークショップが行われているところですね。
This is an open gallery where, in this photo, you can see that there are workshops for the kids.
Next. 市民活動交流センターと呼ばれている先ほどの黄色の部分ですね。
This is a community activity center where, as we explained earlier, the citizens would use freely.
この岐阜というこの建てられた場所は約40万の人口なんですけれども、週末にはだいたいいつも6,000から7,000人ぐらいが1日に訪れていますね。
So Gifu City is a city of population 400,000 people, and this base, ever since it's completed, we calculated almost 6,000 to 7,000 people a day in this using this building.
Next. Tatami space ですね。
This is a grand tatami space.
Okay, next. Gallery space outside floor is also using as a gallery. Next. Next. これもプロムナードに面しているところですね。
So this is facing the promenade in the west.
2階へ上がりますとまず、このエスカレーターエレベーター階段で上がってきて、ここにコンシェルジェグローブと呼ぶグローブがあります。
So you would proceed from the first floor to the second floor through escalator into the first globe, and you would see as you arrive the concierge globe.
そして中央にもう一つリファレンスのグローブがあります。
In the middle area, further down the path, you would see a reference globe.
その他にサイズの違ういくつものグローブがあって、この下が自由に読書をする場所ですね。
So around the globes that we just explained, we have these other reading globes and study globes, as well as browsing globes, research globes.
で、このグローブの周りに行って、自分の本を検索することができますね。
So you can go around the globes and into these areas where the shelves are around, and you can actually browse for what you want to read.
パラレルに書架が置かれているよりも、検索しやすいと思います。
So rather than having the shelves ordered in a parallel direction, having it in a kind of a whirlpool formation is much easier for them to refer to what books they want.
子どものグローブも2つあります。
So there are 2 kids globes as well.
そしてさらに南側のテラスに面しても本を読むことができますし、東側、西側についても同じように大きなテラスで本を読むことができます。
So we also provide outdoor spaces where people can read books. For example, the one on the south, which has ample, nice south lights, and on the east, facing the east, there is the mountainous scenic terrace, and on the west, we have a terrace that sets back called the Promenade Terrace.
Next. エスカレーターで今グローブの下に吸い込まれるように2階へ上がっていくところ
So
で
you
す
can
ね。
feel as if you're basically slowly sucked in into the second floor by the globe.
Next. 11個のグローブと呼ばれるオブジェクトが天井から吊られています。
So there are 11 globes in total that are hung from the roof.
Next. これは原健也さんという日本を代表するデザイナーによってデザインされたサインですね。
We collaborate with one of the most famous signage designer, Hara Kenya, for this signage.
どの方向にどのような本があるかということがここで示されています。
So from that point, you can see which direction you should go for certain books.
Next. そしてさらにここには11個のグローブがの内容が示されています。
So on that top of the plinth, you can see a floor plan with where each globe is located and the number for that globe.
Next. 初夏は4段ないし5段ぐらいの、大人だったら目線が通るような低い高さに抑えられています。
So the shelves are designed so that they don't go further than five levels, so that it's low enough for an adult person to have their vision basically connected throughout the entire building.
Next. 4種類のサイズのグローブがあり、一番小さいもので直径が8メーター、10、12、14という4サイズです。
So there are four sizes of globes. There's an 8 meter in diameter, 10, 12, and 14. The biggest is the 14th.
このグローブはまずポリエステルの立体の織物で作られ、そしてその上にテキスタイルをかぶせてこのそれぞれ違ったパターンがデザインされました。
So the globe consists of a polyester fabric to begin with, and on top, basically added fabric with different patterns, as you can see.
Next. 例えば、こうやってリラックスしながら本を読むグローブですけれども、はい。
For example, this is a globe where you can relax and read.
ここの中にいるときに、少し他の場所とは違った囲まれた感じ、インサイド、インテリオリティを感じられるような高さに設定しました。
So when you're under the globe, we have actually designed the height of the globe so that you feel enclosed in almost like an interior, but it's not completely enclosed.
これ面白いんですけれども、このソファーは、外と中で高さと奥行きが違っています。
So you can see this is quite interesting. It's a design for the sofa, and you can see that towards facing the inside of a globe and outside of a globe, we have a different height for the seats.
したがって、本を読む時の姿勢が外と中で変わってきます。
So when you're facing inside the globe and outside the globe, you would have a different posture.
Next. 子どもがきちんとデスクに向かって、勉強するようなグローブもあります。
So there are also globes where the kids would be very hardworking and working at a desk, as you can see.
Next. Okay, next. Next, next. これは小さいキッズのグローブですね。
This is a small kids globe.
Next. Next. テラス。南側テラスですね。
So this is, you can see this is a terrace on the second floor.
Next. 外側に向かうカウンターのスペース。
You also have counter spaces that are facing outside.
ここでも、 自分の好きな場所を選べるということがすごく大事なことですね。
So same for other projects. This is also very important where the users of this building can choose where they want to be.
Next, evening view.
It's the night view.
Next. Okay, next. Oh, this is the last slide. In 10 days, in Japan, cherry blossom is full bloom. So please come to Japan. Thank you very much.
So we would like to have a few questions, and one thing that I should have mentioned at the beginning is that the last time that Ito-san was here, we also had an exhibition of Kiyonori Kikotake, and Ito-san was very important in really trying to enable the making of that exhibition. At that time, just before then, we had spent quite a lot of time with Kikotake-san, and unfortunately he passed away just before we had the exhibition. And Ito-san had worked with Kiyonori Kikotake, was one of the members of the Metabolists. Just in the past few weeks, we've actually now have a book which is partly based on the exhibition, but partly also something independent. And it's been edited by Ken Tadashi Oshima, and Ito-san has also written in that book, and there are some photographs of him when he was very young and had just started working in the office. But also Mark Mulligan has a piece in there, and a number of really wonderful things. I think the book is available in the library, and so I should have mentioned that. The other thing is that here we are also lucky this semester to have Atelier Bawa, so I think there's a kind of continuity that is going on in the school, and it's wonderful that Moriya-san is also here with us. So some of these works that Ito-san is showing has a kind of resonance in terms of what is happening in a way in terms of the groups of people who are in Japan, but also I hope that it demonstrates our kind of seriousness towards embracing these projects and this work. So, Ito-san, one question that I will have, maybe because I'm sure there will be other people who will ask you. I wonder what you think about this, what I would say, disjunction or this slight difference that exists between the idea of working on projects like Taichung Opera House, which are very much based on very sophisticated tools, computation tools, modeling tools, to really understand the formation of these projects as idea, because these are very difficult to draw. And therefore, you really need the sophistication of tools and techniques and technology to bring about a kind of sectional building like the Taichung Opera House. At the same time, it seems that if you are left alone, if you are left to your own devices, you're still someone who really loves craft. You seem to appreciate just the sheer labor of architecture, people working hard. You are not a very industrialization kind of person. It's all about the workers. It's all about the welding. It's all about how much effort goes into that. Sometimes it seems, and you and I have talked about this thing, sometimes it seems that the craft can't be quite as precise as the computation, and the computation cannot be as imprecise, which is also important as the making. So what do you feel, what do you think about this idea of the relationship between tools and precision and the reality of construction? What thoughts do you have about that?
デザインをするときにも、もちろんこういううちのスタッフともそうですし、あるいはエンジニアとも、あるいは施工者、あるいは公共だったら自治体の人々、そういった人たちと、一緒になって考えるっていうことを、非常に僕は大事にしています。自分で考えられる、自分でイメージできることっていうのは非常に限られてるわけで、外の人から何かヒントをもらった時に自分がそこで新しい考え方を想像できる。そうやって、何か自分が最初にイメージしていたものから、全く違うものに変わっていくということにすごく関心がありますということをまず。
So firstly, he wants to say that he thinks it's very important for him to work with people. When he designs architecture, he would collaborate with, the staff who would do, computing maybe, and with the structural engineers, they do the calculations. Obviously, he would work with local people and the community as well. So, of course, he would have an original, maybe a notion of a building, but as the project goes on, he would communicate with all these different people, and then the project would then basically evolve accordingly. And he thinks that, to think about a building alone, just by himself, he can only get so far. But by working with people, his project would excel much further.
そして特にそのコンピューターテクノロジーによってデザインが難しいものになればなるほど、最後は職人の手によって作られなくてはならないという二律背反といったらいいでしょうか、矛盾をいつも感じています。
So obviously, as Mohsen has said, the computer technique is so precise, but then at the end of the day, when you are building it, it's always down to the hands of the workers. So there's a contradicting kind of condition that he always would feel.
特に我々が日本で、非常にその精度の良い建築を作ることができるのは、日本の建設会社、そしてそこにいる職人たちが極めて優れている、そしてまた良いものを作りたいという強い意志を持っていることによって支えられています。
So, especially when in Japan, where the construction techniques are so advanced and the construction workers really have pride in what they make and what they build, he thinks that in Japan, when he's building buildings, he's being blessed by the advancement of the construction industry.
ですからエンジニアにしろ職人にしろ、出来上がった時にこの建築は俺が作ったんだという人がたくさんいればいるほど、その時はいい建築になるような気がしています。
So, when the building is complete, the more people that would say, "Oh, I built this," I am involved in the building of this building. The more people who says this, the better the architecture becomes.
Okay.
Is that a good answer to you?
No, it's just that next week, some of you may not know, but next week we are going to have a kind of a conference in London, which will be at the Leadenhall building. And this is a building which is otherwise known as the Cheese Grater. Maybe many of you have seen it. It's a building by Rogers, Stirk, and Harbour. And last semester we had Graham Stirk, who's the designer of the building, come and give a talk. And this is a very high-rise building, he made the point that this was a building that was built with 300 people. Now, Ito-san just has 300 people on the roof. But in that building, 75% of the construction material is made off-site. And basically, it's a high-rise that is assembled. So I think this issue of a kind of, it's not resistance, but in some ways a kind of some form of resisting industrialization and actually putting the emphasis on the labor is something interesting. But related to that, it seems that, for example, with the Gifu project, the roof, and with Taichung, there is also something now about multiple layers, about density, about weight. And so does that mean that the next building will just get like thicker and thicker and there'll be more layers because there'll be more people working on the site? Is that like the theory? It's just a joke.
手の方が重視してるんじゃないかということを言っていて、でさっきもロンドンで来週それをなんか議論すると思うんだけど、でも伊藤さんのなんかさっき見せた岐阜の屋根の上に150人乗せるとき、なんかそういう。
I didn't talk that long.
人どんどん増えるような建築になるんですか？
いや、まあたくさんの人を煩わせなくてはならないということはあると思いますけれども、ただ例えば、今日お見せしたプロジェクトではありませんが、例えばトッズのプロジェクトとか、あるいは福岡で作った、グリーンと呼ばれるプロジェクトでは、職人たちがかなり3ディメンショナルなCG をコンピュータグラフィックスを自分たちで描いています。で、それを見ながら背筋をしたり型枠を作ったりということもやっているので、決して手だけではない頭も相当変わってきているということは言えると思います。
So he's explaining that, of course, sometimes it's inevitable to have a lot of people involved, especially on a construction site. But you're saying that there is a difference between the computing techniques and people's hands crafts, right? But maybe he didn't show the projects today, but for example, at TOTS, the building at TOTS, as well as there's a Green project in Fukuoka. Also, the people involved, they both understand the computer graphics as well as making with their own hands. So it's actually sometimes you get people who are involved in both, and it's not just a gap between the difference between the computer and the hands is sometimes not so evident.
しかし最近メキシコのプエブラという町で、博物館をデザインして、オープンしたばかりなんですけれども、そこでは12月に現場に行ったら、現場の中に1000人ぐらいの人たちが働いていました。それは本当に働いているのか働いていないのかよくわからないんですけれども、子どもから家族で来ている人たちがたくさんいた。ですから建設現場自体がもうコミュニティのスペースになっているというのは悪くないなと思いました。
So he's explaining that he recently visited a site last year in October in Mexico. It's a museum. December. And at the time, there were almost 1,000 people on the site. But he is not sure that everyone is a worker because there are kids and there are family members. So it's very strange, but then he feels that maybe it's not so bad, like to have the construction site already becoming a community on site. So he finds it quite amusing.
日本では今その省力化いかに職人を少なくして早く建築ができるかということを考えていますけれども、 まあそれには少し逆らいたいという気持ちは持っています。
So in Japan, for Japanese construction, you will see obviously the absolute opposite of how they would try to reduce the number of workers as much as possible and make it as efficient as possible. He thinks that maybe that's also another extreme, and he actually prefers maybe the more kind of humane kind of situation on site.
Any questions? Please, we have some mics. Anybody else? If I could just know if you plan to ask a question, it will help us. Anyone from the back? Yes, okay. Please, go ahead.
Okay, first, thank you so much for your talk, and I really like what you said about the beginning about the ripples, and there is no confinement in your design and always dissipate these kind of things. But I also wonder that because I'm also from an Eastern culture, I can understand this kind of philosophy and or spirit or something, but they are not something that's completely logical, or so they have like guidelines for you to guide your design. So I was wondering, like, how can you adopt this kind of thing into your design? Is there a certain way of training that you can approach to this? Like, for example, I really like the way how you arrange the stones and things like that. Yeah.
説明すごい面白いと思ってて、自分自身もアジア人なので、そういうなんかスピリチュアルなコンセプトに対してすごい興味を持ってるんだけど、でもなんかやっぱロジックとは真逆なことなので、伊藤さんの設計はどうやってバランスを取るんですか？
まあ具体的なデザインのその方法としては、ある幾何学的な秩序を採用する時もあるし、全く感覚的に物の配置を決めていくという、両方のケースがありますが、そのロジックとしては、大きくはそのみんなの家を作る時も、こういう建築を作る時も、いかに自然に対して、開いた自然と一体化した建築を作ることができるか、これは私がその、日本の近代以前の建築を考えた時に、その自然と一体化する建築の作り方をいかに日本の人が楽しんできたか、これアジアに共通だと思いますけれども、そのようなことをもう一度そのモダニズムの建築をの時代をの向こう側に何かそういう夢を描いています。
So to answer your question, obviously there needs to be a balance between the spiritual and the logic, and he thinks that, for example, when he builds the home for all, there's a lot of logic involved, but at the end of the day, the aim is to open towards nature. So either way, sometimes he would justify a way of creating a place here or there, and it's basically he's ultimately trying to open out, connect more to the nature. So it's actually it's a counter argument to what modernism does, and he thinks that he wants to propose something that is more positive in that sense.
Okay.
Ito-san, thank you. You showed Sendai and Taichung back to back, and I thought of a project in between them, an American project that wasn't realized, the Berkeley Art Museum, as sort of perhaps a stepping stone between those projects. And I wondered if that's true at all, and if the museum's inability to be realized was partially due to labor, which Motion has brought up. If you could just speak to those things.
仙台の後ですぐ台中を見せられたんだけど、その間にもバークレーミュージアムがあって、でそれなんか彼見たことによってちょっとその間がなんかトランジションにはなってるんじゃないかっていうことを、バークレーが仙台と台中、仙台から台中になる前の中間点というか、これが例えば仙台からすぐに台中に行くんじゃなくて、その間にバークレーが入ってるんじゃないかということを。
バークレーは台中より後ですね、ほぼ同じ時期かもしれませんがスタートしたのは、 バークレーはもう少し後で、そして、そのバークレーのシステムを使って今度メキシコのミュージアムが出来上がりました。ですからタイチュンはかなり仙台に近いということができると。
So actually, the design concept for the Berkeley Museum was after the concept after Taichung came out, so actually, the Berkeley Art Museum, although unfortunately wasn't realized, the concept was used later on in the Mexican museum project that we just talked about, where there were a lot of workers on the site. So that is basically being reapplied. So which means that actually to him, Taichung is it's more directly related to Sendai in comparison to Berkeley Art Museum.
Okay.
Ito-san, thank you very,
Oh,
very
thank
much.
you.
Everyone is going to come and join you with the cherry blossom season now
Yeah.
in 10 days' time. So thank you again. And thank you, Julia, for doing everything.